Hey everyone, welcome back to
Just a podcast.
Okay, so today we are going to be talking about some serious topics. So trigger warning, we will be talking about sexual assault and human trafficking. So if that does trigger you or if that makes you uncomfortable, then feel free to not listen to this episode. We'll be going over some safety tips and just diving deeper into what we can do to take preventative measures with some officials. So if you're interested in listening, stay tuned.
Hello, everyone, and welcome. So to get started off, can you provide a brief description about yourself, what you work in, and why you're passionate about personal safety? So let's first get started off with Dr. Jason.
Hello, everyone. My name is Dr. Jason Plunkett. I'm an organizational psychologist and a marriage and family therapist. I've been working with gang members and juvenile sex offenders for almost 20 years now. I've been working with at-risk youth, and my focus right now is human trafficking. So I've been working with human trafficking, anti-human trafficking work for the past 4 years. And I'm just passionate about safety because I think that awareness and safety is the best preventative of being attacked, hurt, or assaulted in any way.
Awesome, thank you. Next, can we have Detective Cavarado?
Hey there, I'm Detective Cavarado. I have been in law enforcement for just under a decade. I'm a special victims detective, so I focus on crimes against persons and sexual assault related, but also more recently with the kiddos. So I'm a nationally accredited child interviewer. And so my focus is on safety in the family for women and sexual assault, but also with children and sexual assault victims and abuse there. And I'm passionate about safety because, like Dr. Jason had kind of echoing him, I think it's understanding what the real risks are versus what the media or movies, things like Taken and stuff really highlight versus the reality of who victims are and who victimizers are. And preventative medicine is kind of stems from that understanding.
Thank you. Next, can we have Lieutenant Lawler?
Hi there, I'm Rebecca Lawler. I'm the day shift lieutenant at Georgia Gwinnett College in Lawrenceville. I've been a police officer for 22 years, part of that military, part at Gwinnett County Police Department, where I was also a special victims detective there. And now at the college for 8 years, where we have really tried to focus on connecting with our student population in ways of crime prevention and personal safety. We've really pioneered some programs on campus for sexual assault awareness, personal safety, women's self-defense kind of courses, and really just try to push being involved, aware of your surroundings, and not becoming a victim in the first place.
Thank you. And lastly, we have Detective Reed.
Hey everyone, I'm Detective Danielle Reed. I work for the Gwinnett County Police Department, currently assigned to their Vice Unit. I patrolled the areas of Stone Mountain, Lawrenceville, Loganville, Snellville before I was assigned to our narcotics unit. And then more recently, I transferred to our Vice Unit. So I work everything from human trafficking, sexual exploitation, pimping, some other crimes that are just kind of mixed in there as general complaints within Gwinnett County. And then more recently, we've started working internet crimes against children. I am passionate about personal safety because I deal with a lot of victims and I see the trauma that exploitation causes for them. And then as a young woman living in this country, like I'm sure a lot of you have, I've been a victim of sexual assault myself, especially when I was in college. So I am all about getting information out there on how to prevent being victimized and do what we can to be safe as women. And just so you guys, my video is off because I do some undercover work. So
no worries, it's all good.
Fine.
All right. So now that we have gone to know everyone, I want to pass it off.
We want to ask a question to all of you guys about basically what are some of the most astonishing statistics that you have, or ones that you think that some people may overlook when it comes to sexual assault, human trafficking, etc., especially in your fields?
I could start. So if you go to our website, I work for an organization called Zoe International. We combat human trafficking in 5 different countries, specifically the United States and specifically in LA County. So I'm out of California, Los Angeles County. And statistics are often great to know, but they're not always the truth because you only know what you know. So we don't know what we don't know. And human trafficking is a $150 billion organization. And we don't know how much it's even more in regards to what we don't know, right? And there is over 40 million people who we call victims of human trafficking. And there's a new term called modern day slavery, right? So enslavement into this work. In LA County, a statistic that most people aren't aware of is that a year ago, it was 70 to 75% of human trafficking victims were females of color. Now it's 90% of trafficking victims are females of color. So those are some statistics within my field of human trafficking. And the stats that I was telling you are worldwide statistics, meaning that over 40 million people are being trafficked currently. That's a global stat. And it being a $150 billion organization is a global stat as well.
Wow.
So I guess I'll go next. I think it's important to highlight the fact that, I mean, being safe is important, being intentional is important, recognizing where these situations are, where these issues are. I don't want to say nationally in terms of like geolocation, but I mean just the prevalence of it, right? So I live in Atlanta, or a suburb of Atlanta. I started actually working with Gwinnett Police Department, like so many of our panelists are or have. And so we live outside Atlanta. It's one of the biggest hubs, not only for human trafficking, but general to and fro. We have the largest, or one of the largest airports in the country, which makes it a huge hub for the movement of people and illicit products and stuff like that. But I think it's important as well, just for the viewers to recognize that just if they are a person of color or a female, or their specific self falls into the demographic that we refer to, that they are not necessarily in danger, but they need to recognize maybe other people who are, because the majority of human trafficking victims are from at-risk populaces, and a lot of them are lured into like trafficking by other people, right? And there's usually promises of notoriety or fame, or so many people are lured to the idea of a lifestyle, when these are just ploys made by evil people who want to prey on vulnerable people. And so a lot of them we see, typically younger women or children. 12 to 14 is the average age of people getting taken in or being groomed and moved into human trafficking and sexually exploitive situations. They're often from at-risk communities like foster care, or orphans, or a lot statistically the LGBTQI community. Just a lot of people that have difficult that, like, roots are not necessarily a thing for them, and so they're looking for homes, and these people promise them homes, or they promise them stability, they promise a future, they promise a lot of things that they don't intend to deliver on. And so for your listeners who are rooted and grounded in situations that are healthy and situations that are safe, rather than, in my opinion, I would rather promote outward eyes rather than fear of, in our own selves. So of course, being safe, of course, being aware, of course, having like a heightened awareness of like, this feels wrong, or this doesn't sound right, or why would somebody contact me on Instagram and say that they can make me a model and give me a Maserati in the next year if I send them naked pictures or whatever. But at the same time, being aware of the people that are in their lives that may be trafficked and they can offer help to, and looking at what that looks like and what a victim looks like as well, so that they can not only look out for themselves, but they can also look out for others.
Definitely. Thank you for that.
For me, the getting the information for people out there about college-aged victims, and they're more at risk for us experiencing sexual assault, both men and women, and the prevalence of it, how that it's happening, how often it's happening, and also that they're not reporting it. They're not reporting it to authorities. They're not reporting it to campus authorities, and that what they can do to better prepare themselves, recognize it when it's happening to their friends, or roommates, classmates, and better protect themselves.
So as Detective Cavaretto already said, Atlanta is one of the largest hubs for human trafficking in the country. And I think that's something that we in Georgia need to really understand. As of 2010, 65% of the men who purchased sex with minor female children in Atlanta lived outside of the 285 perimeter. So this is something that is not limited to inner city communities. It is happening in our suburbs. It's happening in the communities that we would typically look at that think that are more affluent or wealthy. It is happening all around us. 72,000 men purchase sex from a minor every month in Georgia. And that's from 2010. So I'm sure that number has skyrocketed since then. I think Detective Cavaretto also mentioned that the average age that girls enter into the sex trafficking industry is between 12 and 14. So the age that these girls are getting snatched up and victimized on average is extremely low. And by nature, when we think about the sex work industry, we hear a lot of talk about consent and what women are consenting to versus what they're being forced to do. A minor cannot consent to be a sex worker. By nature, if you're 12 to 14 years of age, you cannot consent to being a sex worker. So being aware of what your friends are showing, some outward there. Well, I can talk about signifiers later about what victims look like, some things that they exhibit, signs that you can look for in your communities to identify victims and then hopefully get them help.
Thank you so much for that information. Like that's so crazy to think about how like it could be happening. It is happening all around us. So in that sort of vein, when Kennedy, Milan, and I were thinking about this episode, we were wondering, like, are there any ways that we can guarantee safety? Is there even a way for us to know that 100% we will be safe in any situation? And if not, we were wondering what some of your best tips are to prepare in order to be safe, and what are some easy steps that everyone and all of our listeners can take in order to stay safe?
Coming from a psychological perspective, I would say there's no guarantee of safety ever. And why I say that is because you can do everything you can and you can plan, but because the assault or the negligence or anything like that is coming from an outside source, we can't control other people other than ourselves. So we can do the best job possible to negate risk or mitigate risk, but the very truth is we can't fully stop it, right? From my perspective. My tip is always being self-aware. So I talk a lot about emotional intelligence, right? And it's about being self-aware, knowing who I am, and then also knowing how I manage myself. So then now self-management. So once I know who I am and I know how to manage myself, I then know who I am in social arenas. So then now I'm socially aware. And once I'm self-aware, then I know how to self-manage. And now I'm socially aware, and now I could socially manage, right? So I'm So now I know who I am and what I do in different scenarios, whether I'm going to a party or I'm going to hang out or I'm going to a basketball game or I'm going to a club or anything like that. I could identify who I am in the moment and what I need to look out for and what I can do. Meaning, if I'm going to drink, how much do I drink? If I'm going to use drugs, how much, or maybe if I shouldn't. What safety parameters I'm taking in regards to where I park my car or how I park my car. And I'm speaking as a male who has the privilege of not having to worry about where I park my car sometimes or what I need to wear at night or anything like that. So I'm humbly sharing this with knowing that I have the privilege of a man of not even having to worry about some of those different things. But those are different tips I would say from a psychological perspective, understanding who I am in the moment and where I am in different arenas so that I can then plan from that. So my biggest tip is just that: plan. Being aware enough of this, where I'm going and what I should be doing in the moment to keep myself safe. Now, again, hear my heart about that. Some of those things I think is sad. Sometimes I think you don't have to. I think it would be great if we didn't have to plan. We could just do whatever, right? But to stay safe, I would say a plan is the most important.
Thank you. And I really value that perspective, kind of giving us a glimpse into the more scientific side rather than just looking at the case studies and seeing what's going on in front of us. I like that you can kind of see into people's minds and also your own mind to figure out what to do to prevent it.
Yeah, so again, I feel like I'm going to be saying a lot of, well, echoing Dr. Jason. I mean, for the nature that I'm going behind him, but also he brings up great points. I really appreciate his kind of highlighting on the emotional awareness and the just self perspective. Because so yes, sexual assault is a serious concern. It is absolutely a concern for everybody, gender irrespective, especially during the college ages. However, we look at what are the positions that we're putting ourselves in? And in no way am I saying no matter what you do, there's never a situation where no matter what you do or how you conduct yourself that you deserve like so much of like, well, what was she wearing or was she asking for it or whatever. Never is that a response. That's never ever a possibility, right? But however, on one end, you look at what are you doing to keep yourself safe and manage yourself, like Dr. Jason said. How are you choosing to conduct yourself in a way that, like, if I am going swimming, like, I'm not going to take a bunch of medication that makes it impossible for me to move my arms and legs and stay afloat and then be surprised when I drown. We want to make sure that we conduct ourselves. And I struggle with the idea that, and I don't in any way suggest that the panel is suggesting that college has to be a drunken, wild, insane party, right? I worry that a lot of kids going out to college who want to focus on safety really just want to see how close to the line they can get, but also have some sort of a plausible deniability of like, oh, well, I did this and this and this, and I'm supposed to be safe because of that. Like, it doesn't have to be that way. We can do things like, and like Dr. Jason said, knowing yourself, how much can you handle? If you're an 18-year-old and you didn't go to Wild Ragers during high school, and now all of a sudden there's going to be parties at college with alcohol involved, knowing yourself to know like, okay, I can't keep up with the whole football team. And really, do you want to? Do you want to spend your college days with stories that maybe you're embarrassed about later in life, or situations in your life? The likelihood of a person getting a DUI or hurting themselves from an alcohol-related incident is statistically more likely than being involved in you're walking home in a dark alley and somebody hops out of a dumpster and clubs you over the head, and all of a sudden you're in Russia. So looking at it from that perspective, there's never a way that you can guarantee safety, but as Dr. Jason said, you can always work on yourself and focus on, what am I doing to be self-aware and to be situationally aware? And am I putting myself into situations where all of the warning signs are going off and that your mama would, beat you with her house shoe if she knew that you were doing this type of thing. But you're going to do it anyway because your friends are doing it or whatever. I'll talk about it later because there's further questions on about peer pressure and stuff like that. But there's no way to guarantee safety. But like Dr. Jason said, there's always a way to guarantee yourself. And that's really only what you can control. But there's so much in that we can talk about that influences whether or not the likelihood is there or influences the likelihood of victimization. And it's really important. I look forward to talking about it more.
I really have to agree with you on the taking ownership of your own actions and taking ownership of your own self responsibilities of the of what you do, what you participate in. Of course, there's people don't deserve bad things to happen to them by any of their actions or any of their behavior, but you really do have to take ownership of what are the situations that the things you do have control of that you're putting yourself into. For me, we really try to preach of being aware of your surroundings, and this really goes with not just incidents of sexual assault and places where you might be victimized that way, but really any kind of crime prevention, any kind of personal safety is being aware of your surroundings. We joke that on the campus we drive around and 99.9% of the kids are walking around with their phones in their faces, literally walking out in front of traffic, walking into walls. We've watched it, but just so absorbed with that phone or whatever that distraction is for them at the time. But being aware of your surroundings, and that goes into also being aware of who you're with. And to echo what Dr. Jason said, who are your friends? Who are you going out with? Who are these people that you're going to go to the club, or you're going to go to that party, or you're going to go to that game with? And, are they trustworthy? Are they going to take care of one another? Are you going to know that if one of you does, overindulge a little bit or start, maybe going in a direction that isn't the safest, you have some friends that are going to pull you back and kind of make sure that you're going to get home safe. And have a plan with your friends. Have if you see one person getting a little too friendly with one of your friends, and maybe he's had too much to drink and is not making the best decisions, have an exit strategy and have a way to take care of one another so that everybody gets home safely.
So from a law enforcement perspective, obviously we've all said that there is no definite way to guarantee safety. We can do all the right things and we can take all the steps. And if there is a bad person out there who is looking to victimize someone, they're going to do what they can to find a way. I like what Dr. Jason said about knowing your own boundaries and knowing what you're comfortable with, because I think as women, that's something that we tend to overlook. We walk that line between being too nice or being too aggressive, or I want to be nice and I want to make friends and I want this boy to like me, or I want to fit in with this group of people, but also they're doing things that make me uncomfortable. So I think as young women, it's important for us to know what we're comfortable with physically and verbally. If somebody's entering into our space, how can we tell them that they're violating our boundaries respectfully? Because that is something that we absolutely need to do. I like that in recent years, I've seen an uptick of women on social media coming out and saying, these are the things that I've started doing to protect my own boundaries, to protect my own energy, and it's made me healthier. Maybe I don't want this guy touching the small of my back as he passes me. Maybe I don't want to give this guy a hug. Maybe I don't want to be surrounded by this group of men who seem a little bit predatory and are making me uncomfortable. Knowing what you're comfortable with, knowing what your boundaries are, and enforcing them respectfully. From a law enforcement perspective, I graduated college in 2016 and I went to Georgia State for my last 2.5 years. So are any of you going to Georgia State by chance before I go into this?
I'm going to Georgia Tech, so I will be in that arena.
Okay, so
one
you're
of my
going to be
siblings
in the
went
city.
there. Yeah.
I don't know what Georgia Tech's campus is like short of driving by, but Georgia State is legitimately integrated with downtown Atlanta. It makes for a really cool college experience because you really get to see the city and explore and branch out. Like for me, that was way out of my comfort zone and I loved every second of it. But there is one building on campus called the Adderhold building that is like a mile away from everything else. And every semester I had a class in that building and it was always either an 8 a.m. or like a 7 p.m. when it's usually dark outside. So what I did as a commuter, I looked for people in my class immediately that were also commuting, that were walking to Adderhold. And I gave the sales pitch, I swear, like I'd buddy up with them and be like, listen, I don't want to walk by myself. You don't want to walk by yourself. We don't know who's out here. Let's walk together. Because just being with another person made me feel safer. I got some great friendships out of it because very simple things like that can lead to bonding and friendships down the road. It made me feel better about that mile-long walk that I had to take. And then I think somebody already mentioned putting your phone down, taking your headphones out, because I know at a college age, it is so easy to just get lost in what we have to do. We're thinking about our next class. We're thinking about the project that we have due or that presentation or that paper. But it's so important to be hyper aware of your surroundings, knowing who's looking at you, knowing if anybody's following you. Stuff that makes the hair on the back of your neck stand up is much harder to notice when you're buried in a phone or you have headphones in. It sucks. It is difficult to always be watching what's around you, but I promise it pays off because it's going to make you feel so much safer about where you're going and what you're doing.
Definitely. As we are all approaching that like college age and we're going to be living by ourselves, we've been thinking about these things, and it's really helpful to know that like there are ways that we can plan and stay safe. So for our next question, we were wondering how to not be afraid to ask for help, because sometimes we feel like we shouldn't react if we're in public, or we're worried that people won't believe us if we're in public and something is happening to us. And we just kind of want to know, number one, how to ask for help, or how we can prevent unwanted advances against us, because sometimes it can be hard to just say no, and especially if you have a kind personality. So we would love to know those things.
Panelists, I'm not sure if we want to continue to go in the same way where I go first or not, but if that's okay, then we could continue, but that's okay?
Yeah, any
Sure. And
It
this can be a total open discussion. If anyone has any words, definitely jump in.
Yeah, so if anyone that wants to go first, feel free. I have words, but feel free to go.
Okay, I'll jump in then, just so I don't have to say, well, echoing Dr. Jason, he can echo me this time. So I feel like the question is twofold. I mean, it definitely is twofold. How do we prevent unwanted advances, and then how do we feel safe asking for help? So kind of multidimensional, but ultimately the answer, I think, is just fortitude, right? Like I think it was Lieutenant Lawler said that she came from a military background, and so do I. And so one of the kind of many phrases that we have is intestinal fortitude, right? So it's just like gut strength of not physical, but character fortitude. And that, so how do we prevent unwanted advances? You can be nice about it, and it's scary, and don't get me wrong, it makes everybody nervous. Nobody wants to be, I mean, not everybody. Some people don't have a problem being rude or being very, very direct. And definitely over the course of my life, I've been able to hone, maybe too far sometimes, my ability to be blunt and direct. But it comes with time, it comes with age, it comes with experience, but it ultimately starts with a choice. Like, we make a choice to say something about what we feel in a situation. If something makes us feel uncomfortable, we make the choice, stand on ourselves, our foundation of whatever our foundation is, morals or your own self-developed ideas of what's important and what's not, and then we go from it. So if somebody's pursuing you in a way that makes you uncomfortable, say something, like be kind. I mean, there's even ways preventatively to get advice, like talk to an older sibling or friend or somebody that has more, I guess, fortitude experience, and say, hey, how do you, what do you say? Like, a dude's coming up at you at the bar and, is acting a kind of way, like, how do you respond? Or get some advice, just to have things. I mean, one of the things that I talk about in a lot of ways, I'm still in the military. I'm a medic. I've gone to Afghanistan and I've come home, and I have to teach young medics on how to be prepared. And in the same way, that I teach medics to be prepared to respond to medical emergencies, it can be very similar for us. We just keep running through things in our heads. In the same way for cops, we do it all the time. If we're going to a call, we run through, okay, well, this is what radio's telling us, and this is what we're supposed to see on scene. And so what if this happens? What do I do? What if this happens? What do I do? So I think Dr. Jason had talked about making a plan as being one of the best ways that you can be prepared. But so run through those things preventatively. So if a guy comes up and grabs me on the butt, like, what do I do? Option A, smash him over the head with a beer bottle. Option B, shove him. Option C, go to the bar with friends that aren't going to let that guy up to you to begin with. But just running through all those options. So when you're faced with these things, it's not, your brain isn't trying to like all of a sudden come up with something, because you've run through it in your head once before, or at least had something to where your brain has had a little bit shaken out of like, how do we respond and what are the ways that we can do this? And then how to not be afraid to ask for help. One of the statistics that I don't have like numerically, but is true and accurate, and I'm sure that I could find it if I got a little time. The strong predominance of sexual assault and in college and out of college comes from, like, if somebody's going to victimize you, especially in that way, it's probably going to be somebody that you know, and it's probably going to be somebody that's in your circle. And so admitting that somebody that you trusted, admitting that somebody that you brought into your life, especially in your friend group or around your family, is hurting you, is there again a multifaceted response. You have the quote unquote shame of being wrong about somebody, the feelings of like you have to admit it to people, and so the concern about like, well, now that he knows, my friends or my family, like he or she could do something to jeopardize those relationships in the future or even make them unsafe. But again, it comes back to fortitude. And being and knowing that, you have to trust yourself. You have to own your own, like, at the end of the day, what will allow you to sleep at night, more than just what other people think. And so I can't tell you specifically how to not be afraid to ask for help, but I can tell you that there are detectives like myself, my partner and I work insane hours for people. And there are people who love to help people who are victimized, and there are people that are in your life, family members and friends who may not, you might not think of, but will move heaven and earth for you. And if you don't know how to get to those resources like us, like sexual assault nurse examiners, I know here in Georgia, in our area, we have the cottage in Athens, and we have all sorts of resources where you can go and get checked out physically if there's been an instance of sexual assault, and you can get treatment. But not everybody knows about that. But there are people like awesome lieutenants on college campuses, and police officers, and sheriff's deputies and detectives that are willing, but reaching out to somebody in your friend circle that can help you, especially after a traumatic event. Typically the physical response is to kind of shut down. Sometimes we need people to just hold our hands and walk us to the next step. And so having that close, trusted personal friend or family member that can help, and just identifying those support systems, I think is really important. And now I've talked way too long, gave Dr. Jason a lot to echo.
I could just say I just echo all that because that was so accurate. Thank you so much. So a lot of people say communication is key, and I say communication is important but not key. Comprehension is key, right? So communication is one stance because you're sharing something, but comprehension is what's really needed. So I think something that really helps with preventative work is communicating with a strong perspective, and making sure that person knows exactly what you mean, right? I've seen assault victims it started off with grooming, and sometimes it started off with flirtation, and then the predator took it to a different level because of his or her lack of boundaries, and that does not give them a pass in any way. But then they're thinking they're going on with the energy of that other person and what's vibing and all this other stuff. But a no is a no. And so comprehension in regards to when you communicate, having people understand exactly what you mean and how far your boundary is. but that is absolutely going to start off with understanding what your boundary is. Because and it's okay that if you understand what your boundary is and you cross it yourself, or you allow someone to cross it, it's still okay to then start that boundary anew again, saying, no, I need you to stop immediately, right? But those strong communication, I must say, and it's going to sound like a crazy statistic, 100% of every youth I've ever worked with who was the predator or juvenile sex offender, 100% of the youth that they were molesting stopped because someone said stop it, or they went and they told on somebody, right? They told a parent, or they told a classmate, or they told a teacher. 100% of it stopped. Some molests would go on for years. And the one thing that made it go on for years is because that person didn't utilize their voice, right? Again, not their fault. It's always the predator's fault. But I'm just giving you understanding in regards to what you do. Ask for help. There's numbers that you can call specifically for human trafficking, whether it be you're a victim or you see a victim, at 888-3737, 888. That's a phone number that you can just call, whether you were a victim or you see someone that's a possible victim. And you can call 911, you can call your school security, but I would say allow your voice to be heard. That's going to be the number one thing. And I know sometimes I tell folks, I'd rather you be offensive than be abused. So don't allow your truth to stop you from being, even if you had to offend someone by the way you said it or how you said it, I'd rather you be offensive than ever be abused.
My advice actually comes very close to that. I'd much rather people be offensive than be abused. I have a quick story related to that. My 11-year-old daughter recently was helping me move some friends, and a male friend of theirs who was very nice all day long, no problem. He was giving everybody hugs once we got done, and he went in to hug my daughter, and she was like, I don't know you. And I was so proud of her that at 11 years old, because we've had that conversation, we've had that communication of, you don't have to hug anybody, you don't have to let anybody hug you, nobody gets to touch you if you don't want to. We've had that conversation that she at 11 years old in front of friends felt comfortable enough to put that boundary up. And that where it goes into talking about it. She and I have talked about it. I have talked about that with students. I've talked about that with people who've asked me these very similar questions of talk about it with one another. Don't be afraid to use your voice and offend people and tell people, you know, I'm not comfortable with this. It's not okay if you do this. And let other people know what those boundaries are. As women, especially in society, it's like this expectation. We're more subtle. We're more demure. We're supposed to be more, you know, forgiving and that sort of thing. There's no rule that says that. It's just something that has been kind of programmed in us, and it doesn't have to be that way. And putting forth our voice and letting people know what's okay and what's not, and having that plan that the others have talked about what would I do if, and you're right, as cops, we do it all day long. What would I do if? Have that in your head, and it will be that much easier, especially if you already know what your boundaries are.
I love that reinforcement of your daughter respecting her boundaries. That's really great.
I was so proud of her.
Lieutenant, I love that you brought that up, because I was just thinking about how many of us as kids were told by our parents or somebody else in our family, oh, go hug Nana, or go hug Auntie. I know you don't want to, and she smells weird or he smells weird, but just go give him a hug or go give him a kiss on the cheek. This stuff started young for us, right? The boundaries that we do or do not have started when we were so young. And I think that's one of the reasons that it's difficult to ask for help now. I think a lot of us, we don't want to offend people. We don't want to come across as mean. And we were literally raised to not respect our physical boundaries. So it's hard to reprogram ourselves to say, all right, this is uncomfortable. I don't like this. I'm going to say no. And again, there are really simple ways that you can ask for help, or that you can, set your own boundaries and explain those to other people. One of the things that I had to start saying as a young woman was just, no, thank you. I'm not interested. And just leave it at that. I'm not making an excuse. I'm not telling you that I have a boyfriend or a girlfriend or a partner. I'm not making up plans that I do or do not have for that weekend. I am just flat out saying, no, thank you. I'm not interested. And a simple phrase like that, if you have something that easy to fall back on, It makes it so much simpler when you're in a situation that makes you uncomfortable, when that guy is hanging out near you at the bar or the party. If you know for sure, all right, if it gets to this point, no, thank you, I'm not comfortable, or I don't want to. That's really all you have to say. If it goes beyond that, I think somebody mentioned going out with friends or going to parties with people that you know you can rely on. If it gets past the point where you have clearly set a boundary for somebody and they're not respecting it, that's when we need to get other people involved.
I think that's so great what Detective Reed had said too. Just being able to, and I mean, even speaking for myself and as somebody that's finds it difficult to say no, even to people that are safe. You don't have to make up an excuse, because I still find myself doing that, like, oh, God, I gotta wash my hair, whatever. There's so much power that comes from, and I'm like empowerment, empower that comes from just being able to say, I can't. I'm sorry, you know what I mean? Like in your own personal life, like for your own being able to stay without your ends fraying and burning the candle at both ends. But just from, like she said, something so simple is so powerful. Like, you know what? No, thank you. That's so, I appreciate it. It's flattering, but I'm really not interested. Thank you. And there's just so much power that can come from that. And then being able to kind of like walk that out, so where you feel comfortable in it, where it's like the first time or the first few times where you have to use that, it'll be for sure more difficult, or like you get more anxiety, but then being able to lean into it and understanding that 9 times out of 10 people are going to respond, like they might be ashamed or they might not be super happy, but you know, it's not automatically going to turn into this insane, you know, thing. But there's comfort and there's power in knowing that you have a voice and that you can share these things, and then people typically will respect it. And then if they don't, different conversation, but you can deal with it then too.
Thank you so much for that. If there's no more discussion on this question, we'd kind of like to focus it a little bit more towards law enforcement, but we would love Dr. Jason's input as well if he has anything to say. We were just wondering if there are any stories that you think are significant and have shaped your career, because we'd love to hear more of a personal aspect.
Right. And again, I'm so glad we have that psychological perspective and the background on that, as well as the stories, people who have gone and seen it in the streets, seen it in the flesh. That's so powerful. So I really love to hear some of those.
So I haven't been doing this near as long as our other 2 law enforcement guests have. In the grand scheme of things, I would still be considered a rookie. But I can tell you that in the time that I worked on the road and in the short time that I've been in Vice, I have had plenty of young women who are victims of either human trafficking or just sexual exploitation that may not technically meet the code section for human trafficking, but that are definitely being exploited. And I'm lucky that I work at a large metro Atlanta department where we have access to a lot of resources to get women out of these situations, to help them get away from their abusers and their exploiters, to get them into safe houses, get them into educational systems. I mean, resources galore. It is amazing. I am so proud of my department and where I work, because they let us go and help these people. I honestly can't even tell you one specific story. I remember when I was working the road the first time that I dealt with a domestic violence victim, and I was able to get this person to a safe house in Gwinnett County. And that alone, that reinforced why I got into law enforcement. I was like, all right, you know what? We see a lot of people at their very worst days. If you're calling the police or you're calling 911, typically something bad has happened to you, but that wasn't all bad. She went through a terrible thing, but we got her out of it. And now I'm going to stay in it.
I feel the same way as far as that. I don't know if there's one, and maybe it's because I've been doing it too long, one specific event or moment, but one that stays fresh on my mind was when years and years ago I was a rookie officer at Gwinnett, and a domestic violence victim, and apparently she had called before and not a whole lot was done. I don't know what those cases comprised of, but I was able to, with the training that I had and knowing it was the right thing to do, giving her the information for her to help herself and making the arrest and doing what I needed to do as law enforcement. But she called back about a month later and it was a different woman. She had absolutely 100% taken all the advice I had given her, and she was doing so well. Her children were doing so well, and it really, really turned her life around. And what amounted to a misdemeanor arrest, something that should have happened before I got there, as far as another officer responding to something similar, turned into life-changing for this woman. And that had to have been 20 years ago. And I still remember her calling me and saying, what you did helped me. It changed my life. It turned my life around. I got out of the relationship. I've, got a promotion at work. The kids are doing great. And all these things because she had just taken the simple steps of everything that those resources that we had and that I could give her. But it made a huge difference in just like, wow, because there's so many times we go calls where we don't think, we don't know what the outcome is, or we think, they're not going to listen to us. We're telling them what to do, but they're not going to listen to us. And you don't know what the outcome is, but it's a little disheartening sometimes. So when you finally hear that just doing your job and giving the resources that you have made a difference, a huge difference in somebody's life, that's a good feeling. And it's reinforcement that sometimes we need to make sure that we know what we're doing is a good thing in the community.
I'll jump on so there's not uncomfortable silence again. I do echo my other two fellow law enforcement, my coworkers. It's a lot. It winds up being a rather than an episodic type memory bank that we can just pluck one. I mean, there are definitely, of course, there are times where calls jump out in my mind. I don't necessarily know that they're formative. Specifically, I didn't have. I don't have like an experience where I was on the verge of, getting out of law enforcement, and then, something happened where I just was in the right place at the right time. This call, and it's gave me this purpose and renewed meaning. I mean, it's kind of happened on a daily basis. I've like, some days you wake up and it's hard to get out of the bed, and you remember it's a Friday and you remember Monday through Thursday, we had the opposite of situations that happen like Lieutenant Lawler. You go into houses or you have people come into your office where you give them all of the right advice. You give them all of the right information and resources, and they don't use it because we can't help anybody who doesn't want to help themselves first. I mean, we can throw them that lifeline. We can throw them that, flotation device. And if they don't hang on while we're reeling them in, they let go and they go back to whatever their unhealthy relationship is, or they go back to whatever their unhealthy addiction is. We just can't want it more for them. But so you wake up on a Friday morning and you're burnt out, and then, something small, something happens, you get a break in a case, or you get something similar to what Lieutenant Lawler had talked about, just some recognition that, okay, what I'm doing is not futile in all regards. How many times can you pull somebody over for running that stop sign? Ultimately, like, okay, like maybe the stop sign needs to change. It needs to be stop light instead or something. But now I think where I am in my career and in the victims that I'm focusing my attention on, and like Detective Reed, I do also do ICAC investigations, internet crimes against children. So where I am, I guess, in my career and the types of people that I'm talking to, which was never anybody that I didn't want to go into SVU. I was moving towards having a career in dope, and I was doing interdiction, and I was doing I'm on the SWAT team with my agency. And so we were doing a lot of search warrants and stuff like that on different narcotics operations. And then I started moving toward, like, the caseload was such that I ended up being moved towards the SVU realm, and I was resistant, but then I was blessed by somebody coming into our agency and I guess seeing potential in me, and seeing we do incredible work together, and it's for sure not me, and it's a lot more orchestrated by circumstances and stuff like that. But just seeing what we can do. so there's power for me in knowing somebody, a child specifically. A lot of, like I said, a lot of the work that I do is with children. So I know that this is kind of collegiate level, but the kids start as kids, right? And so you have young ladies going off to college, and they started off as children, and they started off either in situations where they shouldn't have been and nobody gave them a voice, or they tried to use their voice and nobody listened, or they learned lessons that they take into adulthood, and then that changes things. Then they encounter law enforcement as adults and trying to change, hold on to the lifeline then. But there's power for me, and there's renewal in my ability to shake off the Monday through Thursday of people ignoring all my advice and everything, going against what I hope to do when I have a victim who has the courage to sit down and talk about the awful things that happened. And maybe they haven't thought about it in years, or maybe it was very recent. They have the courage to sit down with somebody and talk about it and share those things, because it's incredibly vulnerable and it's incredibly personal. And you essentially have to lay out the deepest, darkest secrets of your life to a complete stranger. And for me, it's basically their sex life. And it wasn't necessarily their sex life that they chose, but it was their sex life that they have. And so there's power in that, and taking that and knowing that this is something so precious that somebody trusts me with, and then finding the person who did it, and then getting them in an interview room to go from, I don't even know that girl, I don't care about her at all, to presenting an argument and talking to them, and then getting them to admit, you know what, yeah, like I did do that, and she is a victim, and those were my actions. And knowing that we get to move forward in pursuing justice then. So it's not just, she's no longer just a victim, we're moving together towards her becoming a victor over that situation. And so those are the things that I have to renew in myself, or just focus on daily, that it's these cases, these people, for such a time as this, I'm involved in their lives, to hopefully move them towards the end zone of healing and wholeness and recovery from the bad things that have happened.
That's powerful. From victim to victor. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing those. Dr. Jason, do you have any stories you'd like to share?
So I've been working probably with thousands of kids for the past 20 years, and working with gang members. There's one kid who really, I think, formed me wanting to help youth specifically who were abused sexually. Was a hardcore gang member, 6'2", 6'3" years old, 6'2", 6'3" in height. He had tattoos all over his face. Just hard. If you saw him in the alley, you'd probably want to walk away. That's just how the grimy look that he had. Was one of the sweetest young men I've ever met. Talented, athletic, and just genius. He opened up to me about being assaulted by his grandfather, so I had to make a SCAR report, which is a suspected child abuse report. That's what we call it, at least in Los Angeles. After we made a report on the grandfather, they investigated the grandfather, and the grandfather was then, at that time, molesting his siblings and his nieces and nephews and some cousins. But he was vulnerable enough to open up. And because he was honest and open and was vulnerable and wanted to move forward in his life, he had talked to me about everything his grandfather made him do. And it was so hard for him. But after that report was made, several kids in his family were saved because of that, and we were able to send that person to jail, and he's probably still in jail to this day right now, even though that was about 17 years ago. So that really formed my perspective of helping people who have that story, and then it made me want to work with the perpetrators, because if I could work with the perpetrators, I could help them to stop perpetrating, right? So then that's when I moved from gang members to working with the juvenile sex offenders. And now I'm in human trafficking with the same concept regarding to how do we help rescue and recover. And then I talked about how prevention is the key right now. There's a quote that says, do you want to build a fence at the end of a mountain, or do you want to build a hospital at the bottom of it? Well, I say let's do both, but I'm going to focus on the fence. So most people don't fall off that mountain, right? So that's kind of what just formed me. 90% of everyone I've ever worked with, 90%. And I've worked with from celebrities to children to human trafficking. Now I have my own private practice, and 90% of them have been a victim of sexual assault. And I love the victim to victor concept, detective. What we tell our human trafficking victims is identify yourself as a victim first, because you want to know that this is a problem and someone did something wrong to you. And then you'll transition that into becoming a survivor. But yet you're more than a survivor, because you're not just surviving, you're overcoming. So then we identify you as, and you identify yourself as an overcomer. And then those who choose then become a liberator. It's been my honor to walk with victims who've been a victim in their transition to then being a survivor, to overcomer, to a liberator, where they're now doing the work. They're an advocate. They're teaching from their life perspective and being able to bring other people from that situation. So that's kind of just my quick story.
Thank you so much for sharing all of those stories. That was extremely powerful, and it was so interesting to hear about. The last question we have in this section is mainly for law enforcement, but what do you all think is the most prevalent issue that you have casework for? Exampling like trafficking versus theft versus harassment, and should we be focusing on different issues than we are right now? Are there some things that are going completely under the radar?
And I can just bring up this one example. So I've actually done some work with human trafficking in the past and been a part of a team that basically begun a human trafficking campaign. So in order to do that, of course, we had to do a lot of research and make sure that our facts were straight. And so I thought, I definitely don't have the encyclopedia on this information, but I knew a good deal. And so when you all were talking about how a vast majority of these people are people of color who are being trafficked, I didn't even know that. And so just things like that. Do we need to focus on that issue, or is that something that is not being told to the public?
Well, I can say something. So I teach a lot. So I teach on a collegiate level, and I teach other therapists, and I mentor therapists. And I usually walk in a room and I say, who knows what CSEC is? And for you guys who are on the call right now, CSEC means a commercial sexual exploitation of children, right? And I said, and who's worked with a CSEC victim before? And no hands go up, maybe one. And then I said, okay, then who knows what SEC is? And they still don't raise their hand because they don't know. But SEC would be the sexual exploitation of children. And then everyone raised their hands. So I think the misconception is that most people don't quite understand human trafficking, yet we all kind of understand human trafficking, because human trafficking is basically the abuse of a child or an adult by force, fraud, or coercion, and it was for profit. So it's basically abuse for profit. For me specifically, and I'm biased, I think human trafficking is one of the number one things we should keep our eye on during our generation. I end almost every training with this concept. If you're enslaved and you're in Mississippi getting beat, trying to pick cotton, you would have never thought it was going to end. And if you were a Jew and you saw in Nazi Germany and you saw individuals not walking out of gas chambers and just your turn, you would have never thought it was going to end. So I believe that human trafficking is our generation's drama, trauma, hurt, pain, whatever we really want to call it. But I think it's our generation. I think in our generation, we also can end it. Human trafficking is also why it's part of my call right now, because it's second to drugs. So there's drugs, human trafficking, and then guns. We also don't even know if drugs and human trafficking may be switching soon, but that's because drugs or guns you sell one time, but human trafficking, you sell that human over and over again. And it's only anyone that's been a victim of human trafficking usually have a 70-year lifespan. So I often push human trafficking and share human trafficking, because I think a lot of people believe it's something that's happening internationally in some South Asian country, and it's not happening domestically, even though it's been identified in every state in the United States.
Dr. Jason, that was fantastic. I love that you brought that up, because I definitely think that movies and media have led us to believe that human trafficking is something that happens overseas. It's not something that happens in our own backyard, and it absolutely is. I want to read something real quick, just so you guys know. By Georgia law, human trafficking is any person who knowingly recruits, entices, harbors, transports, provides, obtains, or maintains another person for the purpose of labor or sexual servitude. So he mentioned force, fraud, or coercion. When we're working human trafficking cases, those are the three things that we look for. If we can get force, if we can get fraud, if we can get coercion, typically we're able to make a human trafficking case. The thing that kills me, and that I wish we had more education on, was what human trafficking entails, because I see a lot of women that have been forced into the sex work industry that are absolutely victims of human trafficking that just don't know they're victims, because they don't have the resources. They haven't been told what it is. They just think that, all right, this guy's my pimp. Yeah, he takes all my money. he beats me or he starves me or he's holding on to my ID and my license and he won't let me go. But I'm not a victim of human trafficking. That happens in Southeast Asia. That happens in South America. That happens in Central America. But that's not happening to me, when absolutely it is. I really think that we do need more focus on human trafficking and what it entails, just so that we are able to identify these victims and get them the help that they need, and maybe show people that may not know they're victims that there is a better life for them, that there's a way out, and that there absolutely is a consequence for this person that they think is just their pimp who's actually trafficking them. Something can happen to them and they can get out of it.
I definitely agree with everybody that's spoken so far. So maybe unpopular opinion, although I absolutely believe that we can make strides in how all of this, oh gosh, I just realized I can see all y'all. I just swiped just a little bit and now I can see everybody. That's so different. Dang it, this whole time. Anyhow, sorry. So maybe an unpopular opinion, right? So when Dr. Jason's talking about this is our generation's time to fight for something that seems like may never end. It's so prevalent. It's so entrenched in everything. It seems like it may never end because there's just so much evil involved. I definitely think that we can make strides, and I definitely think that it's important to give our best effort. And so part of that I see, and like we had talked about earlier, is that, I look at children, I investigate crimes against children in an exploitive manner, have sent or been victims of images having been taken or videos having been made of them. And part of them, some of them choose to make them themselves and send them because they've been, there's been an exploitive element. So a lot of it is Instagram, honestly, or social media, Snapchat, Kik and Discord and blah. And so there are people who reach out to them and say, hey, oh gosh, you're so beautiful. Like, I can make you a model. We can increase your followers by a gajillion %. And then you make money, and then, come to Atlanta and you make more money. And then they start getting involved in this type of thing. And it can happen to adults as well. But we look at what Detective Reed had talked about in terms of consent, and a child can't consent to sharing their images of themselves. An adult can. The poor choice in general, you can't unsend something, you can't, unring a bell, and especially when it comes to their images out on the internet or sent, screenshots are forever, even if you take those images down. But so much of what's been done is because people are commodities, right? That's what human trafficking is. It's a commodity. This person, this human, is no longer like a being. It's a sex organ, or it's just something to be used. But then I look at what keeps us from, or I think about what keeps us from, like, we can look at any given person and say, is human trafficking wrong? Like, should women be, and honestly, it's not just women, it's little boys, it's little girls, it's everybody. Obviously statistically likely to be a woman. Should somebody be held against their will and forced to act as an appliance? And 99.99999% of people will say, like, no, of course not. But then we look at what media, what music, and what movies, and what we're allowing to be the norm. Like, what are we like what words and thoughts and ideas are we allowing in terms of who, like, the media, like singers and actors, and the behaviors that we're allowing to be normal, and the music that we're allowing to continue to, like, we're listening to, and the movies that we're watching that allow the idea of these unhealthy behaviors to be so prevalent. And there's so much less value on like, and I hate to sound like, I don't know, just an idiot, but how can we look at women and say, you know, value yourself more than wanting to get drunk and maybe get sloppy and like sleep around because it's your because you can and it's your choice. And then at the same time also say, well, what were you thinking? Like, how did you protect yourself? Like, how did you like now you're a victim? Like, and obviously we don't do that in our, like my profession, we don't do that, or I try to make sure other officers, other detectives don't. But you look at music and media and stuff that's promoting, we say that we value, I don't know, personally, my opinion, so much culture says that we value humans as individuals, but then the commodification idea, and I mean just industry wide, right? Pornography, even as adults, is propagated, and that you're buying images of other people's daughters to watch, and it's there's no background, there's no art, I mean, people might argue against me for that, but you're buying images of other people's daughters to then use as your own personal device, to get your own personal satisfaction from it. And that then turns into like, where's the line, you know, like, how do you decry one thing but then allow something else in culture, in culturally, to be the norm? And so I know that there's a very recent kind of stand against, like Netflix had a movie, I forget the name of it. I'm seeing nods now that I can see everybody. I'm seeing nods. There was a movie that I think was based in France, and there was like little girls that were conducting themselves in sexually suggestive manners, and the whole internet lost their minds. There was that people writing Netflix and people making a stand against something that we all collectively found to be evil. And then somebody listened, like Netflix, a major organization, listened. So the internet, and as much as I now loathe it in my investigations, and want to slap every device out of a child's hand and break every iPhone with anything with a camera that can transmit images is now dangerous. Roblox and Kick and grind, like it's all like horrific to me, but it also connects us. It also makes us able to kind of stand together as a global community and say, like, this is wrong. And more people need to stand up and say, like, nope, like, and I'm like, I hate it, but like Cardi B, like, nope, like you can't talk about like drugging men and then robbing them and that be okay. And also say that, like, we need to say that we value women. And culturally, I feel like there needs to be a shift in what we decide is okay and what we decide is not, needs to be on the same level. And then I feel like we can maybe make a stand. I know that's a really huge, long diatribe off into the left field about it, but that's one of my thoughts, and that's one of the difficult things that I find, just communicatively.
Definitely. Thank you so much for all of your input on this. I think we're going to transition into our next portion now, which is listener questions. So Ken, take it away.
Alrighty. So if you have made it to this point, thank you so much. We truly hope that you guys have learned something. I know that we definitely have. We've walked away from this learning a lot. So we hope you have too. Milan, do you have our links of where they can find us and find where they can see our interviewees?
Yeah,
Interview?
all of that.
There we go.
and our post series about sexual assault awareness, human trafficking awareness, safety tips, having this panel and another surprise guest later on. So you can find all of that on our Instagram at justa.podcast. And we will also be linking a lot of our information, as well as our resources for you to find more information on our link tree, which is at
linktree/justa.podcast. So linktr.ee/justa.podcast.
Awesome. And we are also doing a part 2 where we go over some listeners' questions and ask officials to answer them. So stay tuned for next Wednesday. All right, y'all. We appreciate you guys staying and listening, and we will hopefully have y'all back next week. Bye.
Bye.